Sensing is believing. Mortlock led Ambra to a small door that opened from Mage's control room, and then stood back to let her inspect the inside of Mage. Peering through the door into the simulator, Ambra noticed little more than an ordinary, average-size, empty square room, the interior completely black. There were no lights, no controls, not even a chair. "What? Is this it? It's a black box." Mortlock laughed. "Appearances are deceiving," he said, raising an eyebrow and motioning for Ambra to enter. "Oh, come on, it can't be an empty room." "You're in that simulator to concentrate the energy, the frequencies that generate the simulation, and also so that those running the simulation don't get caught up in the sequence of events the participant is experiencing." He pointed up to a series of cameras around the edges of the room's ceiling, positioned to cover all possible angles of activity in the simulator. "We need to be observing participants at all times to safeguard them and bring them out of the simulation without getting distracted or involved in what the participants are feeling. This is much more advanced than the VR systems we've been able to use thus far. This is total immersion. Participants simply walk into the simulator and the illusion does the rest, much like those you encountered on the way in, but vastly more sophisticated." "How do I get out of it once it has started? Do I need to do anything?" "No. We dial down the simulation at the same time as one of us will come in to touch you as a way of bringing you back to your body. While in the simulation, you're very much out of your body as everything is happening in your head," said Lightstone. "It works as we envisioned. Now we have the diamond," said Mortlock, punching the air. "The maze was the best we've been able to achieve so far. But we'd not be able to run a simulation of this complexity without that space diamond. You're about to be the third person in the world to experience this." "Third?" Ambra looked at Goida. "You didn't want to give it a go?" Goida sniffed and went back to his paperwork. "What's it like?" she asked. "It's hard to describe in words," said Mortlock. "This is something you have to feel. That's the whole point of MAGE." "Okay, let's do it then," she said, taking a deep breath. She stepped through the door, Mortlock shutting the door behind her. Pitch black silence. Next, a rumble under her feet, then up the sides of the simulator. Blinding royal blue light, Saturnian light. Then she was flying, soaring through the skies. She had a bird's eye view of the world from a long way up. It was unrecognisable. The world's mightiest rivers, the Amazon, the Nile, the Ganges, had all drastically reduced in volume and length. There was almost no white around the poles, and the land surface was now more yellow and brown than green. The earth was the wrong colour, and the continents were in the wrong shape. The sea was where it shouldn't be. The physical face of the world had changed. Ambra began to swoop closer to the surface of the planet, gripped by a sense of foreboding. She was over savannah, hundreds, thousands of kilometres. She noticed there were few big animals left to spot. Was there not a single giraffe or elephant left? She was over the far north, the frozen tundra, now a cesspool of hot gas. Inestimable tons of methane that had long been locked up in the ice now released, and cooking the atmosphere with 20 times more intensity than carbon dioxide. She was over the once vast northern boreal forests and tropical rainforests, which had been home to the greatest diversity of plants and animals on the globe, but were now decimated by the loss of rainfall from shifting climatic patterns. Then she was closer. She was skimming over farmland, the world's food bowls. Drought. Abandoned fields and agricultural equipment. Desolation and despair on the faces of souls toiling to eke out an existence on land that had once fed the world, but which was now too parched and hot to sustain much life. Closer again. She was flying through the cities, home to hundreds of millions of people on all continents. Trillions worth of infrastructure, buildings, houses, roads, schools, industry, underwater. Abandoned hospitals, shops, zoos, and universities. She could see makeshift encampments stretching out in all directions as displaced people were forced into neighbouring territory. Everyone was a refugee from something. But there were no aircraft in the skies anywhere. There was no way for people to get to loved ones across a country, let alone an ocean. There were no telecommunications, phones, internet. Nothing, save isolated pockets where she observed a few hackers had managed to cobble together a rudimentary, localised system using salvaged materials. Closer still, she was witnessing the effects of rapidly spreading sicknesses affecting areas and populations that had never before encountered them. Malaria, yellow fever, dengue fever, tuberculosis, even bubonic plague. Borne by disease vectors like mosquitoes and rats, shaken out of their usual habitats by temperature and rainfall patterns that had changed faster than the usual speed of evolution, they had triggered pandemics. Aside from such disease, she saw people afflicted with common illnesses and conditions like gastroenteritis and diarrhoea, dehydration and heat stroke, but with little access to treatment or preventive medication. There were few hospitals, and those few were being run in an ad hoc way, poorly supplied and unable to offer much assistance. People were dying in droves from what had been treatable illnesses. She was on the ground among people. There wasn't enough food. The climate had shifted and destabilised faster than people had been able to adapt to the new conditions to plant, cultivate and harvest the staple foods the world relied on. She saw conflict over food, fuel, water. Though there were some enclaves where people seemed to be working together, most of their observations were people fighting each other for resources, motivated by pure fear. Her heart filled with dread as she wondered what had happened to the vulnerable, those who couldn't fend for themselves. Life was tough enough for the strong and healthy. What of the sick, the disabled, the elderly, and the very young? Across the globe, human civilization had been plunged into day-to-day survival mode. There was no capacity or capability for anything more that had made life worth living. There was no sense of organisation or order, no structure or safety. Ambra fell into the depths of despair at the state of the world. She looked at the barren ground around her and beyond to a camp of makeshift tents by the river. "Mum?" came a small voice from behind her. Ambra spun around to see who had spoken. A teenage boy, rake thin, in need of a bath and a haircut, and wearing clothes that wanted mending, was studying her. "Are you looking for your mother? Is she with that camp over there?" Ambra said, pointing to the river settlement. "What do you mean? Where have you been?" he said. Ambra scanned the boy's auburn hair and grey-green eyes. She looked down at her hands. They were the hands of an older woman. A creeping cold enveloped her. "What's your name?" she croaked. "Don't you recognise me?" "Tell me your name," she repeated. "Nautilus Lightstone." "What's the date today?" "The 5th of October 2042, said the boy with an air of pride at remembering this detail. "Where's your father?" "He's dead. From the malaria. You and Uncle Jevon look after me, remember? Come on, let's go and see if there's anything to eat tonight." Ambra clapped both of her hands over her mouth. This was her son's life? In this world? A world where civilization had been undone. Her heart broke and her eyes filled with tears as Lewis continued to talk, but her ears seemed filled with a roaring sound as she could no longer hear what he was saying. A moment later, the world was interrupted.